Today's speaker, R.A. Bellson, author of Charcoal the Elf, a young adult fantasy trilogy that began as a playful charity project and evolved into something far more searching. He'll be speaking about obstinate plot lines, characters that take control, and what an elf's view of humanity can reveal about all of you. Without further ado, R.A. Bellson.
Move that, yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here on this frigid day. Let me just mention that I am coming at the fantasy series Charcoal the Elf from a different perspective today. On Monday, I had the enormous pleasure to be interviewed by Eric Cooter in a podcast, and we traveled down a very different road than I've done in the past with these talks, because we talked about how the book came to be written as opposed to what the book is about, which is a very, very different discussion. I hadn't thought about the process of writing this book as much as I had been thinking about the characters in it. First, I want to say that I did not set out to write a fantasy trilogy. That was the furthest thing from my mind. What I thought I was doing was contributing a bit of comic relief to a small charity video project that was recorded during COVID. Something light, finite, and easily put away when it was all done. Instead, I seem to have created a character who refused to cooperate, refused to stay in his box, and, big surprise, honestly, appeared to have opinions of his own about the human condition. At which point, my role shifted from author to something much more closely resembling a stenographer. And that character's name is Charcoal the Elf. And there he is. Now, let's talk about how it all came to happen first. Charcoal, as I was to discover later on, was a character / a story that refused to behave. Charcoal is an outsider, and he had a story to tell, and he wouldn't stop asking impolite questions. Again, as I said, completely unexpected by me. When I began working on this is December 2020, and I was approached to participate in a charity video project called Pass the Candy Cane. This was in the depths of COVID. I was not working. I like the way I put that in a past tense, but I was not working. And friends of mine who were producing this charity video said, please come and participate with us. Pass the Candy Cane was inviting people from all over the world to literally pick up a candy cane in their left hand, pass it across the screen while they're recording video, and then pass it off on the right. Videos were submitted from all over the world, and the idea was to encourage people to watch this. The more views, the more hits it got, the more money was raised for food insecure people. And this was December 2020, when things were really bad, as you'll all remember. I did not want to participate in this. I'm going to share a big secret with you all. The holidays are not my favorite time of the year. Not by any means, but they said, oh, please, you have video expertise, you're creative, it'll be fun. And I said, well, all right, but, what am I going to do? And this gentleman right here, who was the producer, Dr. Peter Riscala, said, play an elf. And I said, all right, I will only play an elf if I can be grouchy, irascible, grumpy, uncooperative, and stubborn. And he said, fine. So we put together a video, and at the end of the day of shooting our material in front of a green screen, obviously, he came up to me and he said, that was just so much fun. And your elf is such a character. does he have a name? And without missing a beat, I said, Charcoal. He fell on the floor, laughing. Charcoal the elf, Charcoal the elf. He started laughing so hard. He said, you need to run with this. So over the course of the next several years, I, pick it up and put it down, pick it up and put it down. Originally, I thought I was writing a children's story. I thought it was going to be a 26-pager. Maybe I'd find somebody to do illustrations. It was going to be, that. But shortly, I realized that things had changed drastically. As I said, I sat down to write a children's story, but something changed. The story was not waiting for instruction from me. The story began to go off in its own direction and expand and expand. And more characters entered the story. They basically told me what they wanted me to write, and I just had to write it in the best way I possibly could. I had no intention of writing a trilogy. I had no intention of writing an allegory. I had no intention of writing a morality tale. But that's what ultimately evolved. I wrote about 5 chapters, short chapters. I was still thinking children's story. I shared this with 2 friends of mine, one of them a grade school teacher, the other a middle school assistant principal, and they just looked at me. Neither of them knew I could write. I wasn't even sure I could write. I wrote lots of annual reports and speeches and things like that, but creative, fictional writing, I had never attempted before. And they looked at me and said, this is amazing. I love this. Keep going with it, but, and I wanted the buts, it's totally told in a third-person narrator. I said, yes, okay, I was thinking once upon a time sort of thing. I said, and they said, we want to hear the character's thoughts. We want dialogue. I said, what does that mean? What does dialogue mean? We want to hear their voices. We want to hear them speak. We want to hear them think. Oh, okay, thank you. That's great. 2 days later, I showed up with the rewritten chapters, and they said, you wrote all this dialogue in 2 days? How did you do this? And I said, well, I just wrote down whatever they said. And that's what I'm talking about here.
I guess you're hearing voices.
I'm hearing your voice right now. The basic gist is Charcoal. Charcoal is an everyman in the sense that he is an outcast. He lives up top. Book 1 is called Up Top, and that's what they call the North Pole. Different perspective. He really vilified. He's ostracized. He's mocked. He's ridiculed by both his fellow school members and parts of the Claustown community because he doesn't look like anybody else. He has that mop of hair that doesn't match anybody else's hair in Claustown. Elves do not like different. They are comfortable with their own, and things bang the way they always are. They don't like anything that forces them to start asking questions. So Charcoal is really bullied. And as a result, he becomes hostile, he becomes angry, he starts acting up. He starts wandering out of Claustown more and more frequently because he just has no friends, ultimately. And on one of his expeditions, and that is the moment that this illustration captures, one of his expeditions, he sees something buried in the ice, something dark, something clearly not from there, and he realizes it's something human. He digs it out of the ice, and it's a book, a big, old, fat book of the best of Russian literature. And of course, being an elf, he's able to understand every language. He speaks all languages, including several that no longer exist, and many that are not human, fluently. So the book falls open to Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. He is fascinated because he's reading about this Raskolnikov, who is also, vilified and an outsider. He doesn't fit in. And he starts thinking that there's a lot of similarity between what he's learning about the human condition and his own life. So he begins surreptitiously and illegally exploring the internet to learn more about the human condition, and he becomes hooked. He also realizes that maybe he, as an elf, can aid humans in trying to regain what they've lost in terms of Yule. I don't have to say Yule is the biggest, time of the year up top, and he feels that humans have lost the sense of goodwill, peace on earth. Instead, he's realizing more and more, and especially after he goes down below, I should add, with his cousin Trixie, because she's fascinated at the idea of an adventure. So she coerces him into taking her with him. And they prepare themselves by realizing that humans behave irrationally. Humans behave destructively. Humans behave violently. And not only towards each other, but to the planet itself. And he becomes very concerned about the environmental havoc they're creating, because that affects not only themselves, not only their environment, but let's face it, what's going on up top. If the planet melts, if the ice cap melts, what happens to up top? So, to abbreviate, they head down below. He's just fascinated by a dominant species that seems determined to extinguish itself. As I said, these themes were not predetermined on my part. They emerged, honestly, because an outsider was looking at our civilization and questioning it without stop, really. Now, in order to make the book more accessible, I, with Charcoal's permission, I laced it with a lot of humor, a lot of puns, a lot of references to modern culture, and a lot of adventure, which was easy, because I think you can well imagine that they get into a lot of scrapes when they go down below. They do all this preparation work, but they aren't even remotely ready to deal with what humans just throw at them, without realizing, of course, they're elves, because they're disguised. I bet you all know that elves can shapeshift.
Oh, yeah.
Well, of course. So they go down and they take on human forms. I'd like to read you a couple of pages just to give you a sense of the way the book flows, the way it works. A couple of pages from chapter 1 of book 2. This is called Down Below. So needless to say, a lot has already happened. But this is chapter 1, day 1, Down Below, morning. Shortly after leaving Claustown, the fog lifted. A brilliant Arctic sun illuminated the ice fields, which sparkled as if paved in diamonds on this mid-August morning. So this is not about Christmas. To a human, the reflected light would have been almost blinding, but elves easily adapt to snow glare, as one would expect, and the duo effortlessly scanned the horizon for signs of anything or anyone they needed to avoid. Whew, all clear. To their happy surprise, a moment later, a shiny golden sled and team of huskies pulled up, standing just out of sight of the main gate. A beautiful hand-lettered sign highlighted with red, green, and gold paint, "Next Stop Russia," was propped upright against the velvet upholstered seat. "How thoughtful," said Trixie, a smile lighting her face. Charcoal looked all-knowing beside her. They climbed aboard, and the team was soon racing over the fields of ice. As they sped southward, Charcoal echoed the placard. "Next stop, Russia!" he exclaimed, his voice ringing, but not too loudly. No sense in calling undue attention to themselves. "Where in Russia?" asked Trixie casually, trying not to sound overly curious. "I believe it's a fairly large country." Charcoal laughed. He actually laughed and acknowledged the truth of her statement. Trixie's eyes widened. This was an entirely new Charcoal. Very, very rarely had she ever seen him smile. The episode with the flying food and Yeti disguises came to mind as the first time she'd ever heard him truly laugh. That's in book 1, folks. Charcoal, content and exhilarated. What a concept. There was a purely magical sparkle in his eyes, more so because this might well be the first time it had ever been there. Charcoal felt free. This feeling was a mystery for him. If he could name it, he'd call it light-hearted. But since this was a first for him too, he didn't have a word for it. He knew this was called happy, and he delighted in this wonderful feeling. So strange, so different, so intoxicating. It made him think life might actually be worth living. Ironically, leaving up top, his home, his world, all he'd ever known was the direct cause of this joy. There, it was nearly impossible for him to be happy. Here, there was suddenly no reason not to be. As he started to laugh harder, then harder yet, the infectious mirth swept Trixie right up into its vortex. They both laughed so hard and so long, it almost hurt. 2 elves, one light blue, one emerald green, laughing heartily and freely while zooming across the ice at an incredible speed in a bejeweled sleigh pulled by 12 huskies. Not something one sees every day. A little boy building a snowman out front of one of the northernmost houses in Russia saw them dash by in the distance. They slowed just long enough to wave. As they did, the snowman seemed to wave a stick arm and then bow as they sped by, vanishing as a blur on the horizon. Of course, it must have been simply a trick of the brilliant sun, but a family legend was born at that moment. Many years later, the lad, as a grandfather, would tell the story over and over to his grandchildren, who wouldn't believe a word, but loved it just the same. They'd retell it to their own children and on down the line. And the story goes on from there. So, thank you. So that gives you an idea of what you're in store for. It's meant to be read out loud. Adults, even though it's a YA, young adult book, and adults have been buying it and loving it, you can read it to a child, and a lot of it will just go right over a child's head, but the characters will stick with them, and then they can, revisit it in the future. What happens after, this is response that I've gotten from people who've read the book. Readers feel seen, they feel heard, and they feel unsettled, because the questions that are being asked are questions that we tend to be avoiding right now. I don't believe Charcoal intended to teach us anything. I think he came to me and forced me to write this book because he wanted to challenge us to look at ourselves from an angle we're not comfortable with, to ask questions we've grown very skilled at stepping around, and to raise issues we're trying very hard to ignore. I simply happened to be the one sitting at the keyboard when Charcoal arrived. And at this podcast that I recorded on Monday, the very, very, very intelligent interviewer said he has heard from other writers. Sometimes you sit down and the author creates the story, but there are instances where the story finds the author. And I really do feel that happened in this case. So, to sum up, the trilogy develops a continuing conversation that evolves and expands through the 3 books. 2 of them have been published already. The 3rd is scheduled to come out sometime this spring. And I open the door. I invite you all to step in for anyone curious enough to do so. Any questions from anybody?
We got one right here from Alex.
Yes, Alex.
In your first book, one of the fascinating things was that Charcoal was being bullied because he was different than the other
Right.
fellows.
Yes.
And that actually was, I thought, a brilliant stroke of writing a children's book and including something like that.
Thank you. Thank you.
The second volume is a little different in the sense that it's less about that and more about dealing with other cultures.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that changed the reason why you are now calling it a adult book opposed to a children's book.
Well, no, I mean, as book one was being written, it became clear that the themes were way bigger than what children would be able to deal with. And you noticed I chose to use a really extensive vocabulary, and there's a glossary in the back of each of the books for people who don't recognize certain words. In book two, Charcoal keeps referring to having been bullied, and I think there's a significant message there, because his reactions to the circumstances that he's continually confronted with in book two reflect on his insecurity, on his lack of self-esteem because of what he went through in book one. But it becomes a coming of age as book two progresses, and book three even more so, because I'm not going to spoil anything by this, I mean the plot line is fairly obvious, but in book three, which is only marginally written at this point, because this takes place today in modern times, I've been waiting to the last possible minute for book three so it's not too dated when it initially comes out. I mean, for one thing, they visit the Gaza Strip. And so I need to know what's happening there, when the book launches. But it becomes a passage, a rite of passage, and a coming of age for Charcoal and for Trixie as well, because Trixie is just the opposite side of the coin. She is spoiled. I mean, she is just absolutely adored up top, and Trixie needs to learn to deal with some of the realities she's never had to deal with because she just had it so easy. And so that's where the books start going, because young adults in particular are, as we all know, are struggling with this stuff. We all did to a certain degree. And so I think there's a lot of life lessons scattered throughout the book to help young teens, late adolescents deal with the issues they're confronted with. Thank you for having read them both. I really appreciate it. Anybody else? Yes.
At what point did you decide to make the book a trilogy?
Okay, that's a very good question. What point did I make the book a trilogy? Another mutual friend of ours is in publishing, and she read it. She said, I really think you've got something here. But she said, I feel cheated because I was trying to keep it to one book at that time. And she said, I want more. I want more. I want to know. I want details. I want longer adventures. I want more thinking, more interaction between the two cousins. And she said, have you considered making this a trilogy? Because the story really breaks itself into 3 parts. And I said, really? A trilogy? Oh, that's so done. But that's when, because she absolutely insisted. So, anything else? Yes, John.
I have a question. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming.
Now, eagerly anticipate reading your book. But in terms of process, are you the kind of writer who writes, I have a goal to write so much time per week, month, period, or just as it comes to you?
Well,
how do you do it personally?
I mean, it's going to sound ridiculous, but in this particular instance, when I sit down, I say, okay, what's next? And then I've always been an easy writer when I was writing speeches and annual reports and that sort of thing. It always flowed out of me quite well because I do a lot of my work in my head. With Charcoal, I went back repeatedly and tweaked and reworded and tried to imagine what readers were experiencing to try to avoid it being confusing, especially considering we're dealing with non-humans who have certain abilities humans do not have. But the writing itself flows quite easily for me. And it's really nice to have somebody in my brain dictating it.
With a follow-up question, based on your professional background, writing reports and so forth,
Right.
you have a certain level of confidence in that realm. Now, writing this type of work is more autobiographical in some senses, I imagine. That confidence, it takes a certain level of confidence to share this creative work. And when it becomes published, did you see that transition, or was it a transition?
It was just work to me. It was just more work. I just sat down and said, I've got this, let's give it a shot and see what happens. And my confidence, as you refer to it, the feedback was immensely important to me. I wanted to know honestly what people felt. And that only served to fill my sails more.
Now, this is a self-published.
Oh yes, that's a great question, Joy.
I see you on Amazon.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank
No
you.
agents or publishing houses.
I was advised by my friends in publishing to self-publish because they said there's nothing, it's not looked down upon anymore the way it was years ago. And they said if I tried to shop a fantasy book, it would be so difficult because publishing houses tend to avoid fantasy literature because there's so much of it and they just don't want to have anything to do with it. And even if I did land a publisher, it would be 2 to 2.5 years before the first book came out. Once the manuscript was ready for the first novel, bada bim, bada boom, as they say up top. It was ready. If you have any friends, tell them about me.
We have to all take photos of you and the title of the book and put it on Facebook, Instagram, what else?
Did y'all hear that? Yes, just tell your friends. Here's some screenshots of the charcoaltheelf.com. There is merch. There is swag. So, and I believe somebody right here has a charcoal tote bag right there. Yeah, with charcoal's logo right there. Very attractive.
Before the film even,
Before the film, yes.
or
And
Broadway show.
thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you being here. I do have a few copies of the book for sale, but do you know how to get this back up? Here's the QR code, and enjoy your lunch. Thank you.